As part of last year's update, we introduced the electronic fuel management system and an overview of how the system functions. During this segment, we will cover the necessary precautions to be aware of when servicing an engine equipped with electronic fuel management and the systematic troubleshooting procedure. For more information, refer to APSI number 60 for further detail. When working with sensitive electronic componentry, voltage spikes are among the highest causes of ECU failures. Static electricity is a concern when handling the ECU when it is not attached to the engine. Always make contact with the metal surface on the engine before connecting the wiring to the ECU. Once the ECU is connected and attached to the engine, static electricity is no longer a concern. Voltage spikes can cause immediate damage to the ECU. Use caution when disconnecting the harnesses, welding on the piece of equipment the engine is attached to, connecting or disconnecting the battery, and charging or jump-starting the battery. Disconnecting harnesses. Ensure the ignition switch is in the off position when disconnecting any wire harness from the ECU. Never disconnect the ECU while the engine is running. Weld repairs. Before welding on the machine, make sure the ignition switch is in the off position and remove the ECU from the bracket and unplug the connections. Disconnect the battery and remove it if possible. And lastly, disconnect the engine to tractor harness. Disconnecting the battery. Never disconnect the battery while the engine is running. Make sure the ignition switch is in the off position when disconnecting the terminals. Always disconnect the negative terminal first, followed by the positive terminal last. Connecting the battery. Make sure the ignition switch is in the off position when connecting the battery. Always connect the positive terminal first, followed by the negative terminal last. Charging the battery. The ignition switch must be in the off position. Disconnect the negative terminal from the battery. Always attach the positive charger clamp first and attach the negative clamp last. Never, in any circumstance, jump-start an EFM-equipped engine, as immediate damage from a voltage spike to the ECU could occur. Troubleshooting procedure. Please follow along as a detailed systematic troubleshooting approach is used to determine if the electronic fuel management system is malfunctioning. If the engine will not start or is hard to start, please perform the equipment and engine troubleshooting procedures in Repair Manual Part number 273521. The first step in troubleshooting the EFM system is verifying that the correct part number of ECU is installed. Using the supplied part numbers that are based on the application and the engine model series should identify the correct ECU that should be on the engine. Using the engine, model, type, and code is the most accurate way to identify the proper ECU part number. If the engine will not start after verifying the proper ECU is installed, make sure the ignition switch is off and check the battery cable connections for corrosion or looseness. Remove the ECU from its mounting bracket and make sure all the connections are firmly attached and no individual wires can be easily removed from the plugs. Ensure the engine to tractor connector harness is securely connected and wires are not loose or damaged in the plug. The next step is to turn the key to the run position and observe the stepper motor lever. If the stepper lever moves to the full choke position, then immediately moves back to the no choke position, the thermistor is at fault and would require replacement. If the stepper lever does not move to the full choke position, test the continuity of the power harness connection. If no continuity is found in the EFM harness, replace the harness and test again. If this tests okay, the stepper motor is at fault and would require replacement. However, if this repair still does not allow the choke to function properly, replace the ECU and test again. A cylinder balance test should be performed to ensure each cylinder is doing equal work. If the number 1 cylinder becomes compromised, there will not be a rise in temperature for the thermistor to report back to the ECU for proper choke operation. For more information on performing a cylinder balance test, refer to Service Manual Part Number 273521. At this point, if the EFM system appears to be in proper working order and the engine is still experiencing problems starting, perform another systematic check of the equipment and the engine.